Good morning, darling. I trust you slept well. I hope I wasn't too much of an animal.
Come. Hold me.
You know I will. Party on.
If you say, who was the most sophisticated actor on screen? Cary Grant.
He will always be the archetypal hero of the thriller love story.
He was the most gorgeous fella you ever saw in your life.
The name Cary Grant means box office. And after a career that spanned 30 years, he retired at the height of his popularity. There was no decline, no fall from fashion. He was exceptionally Hollywood's most enduring and best-loved leading man.
So, Courbet told me a young woman came into the gallery and she liked it. She saw in it what I hoped you'd see, so I told Courbet to give it to her. Because he said she didn't have any money, and not only that, she was
I watched An Affair to Remember very, very recently, and I just found as we got near that last scene, I could just feel the tears beginning to well. I don't know why it is the greatest weepy scene of all time. The acting is perfect. And if you look at the moment when he goes through the door, it's extraordinarily understated. And yet, almost every movement of the eyes, particularly the moment when he just closes, out of compassion for her. And because he now understands everything, and he knows what's going to happen. It's wonderful.
He once said to me, he says, I wish I could really be Cary Grant, Just like when we were going into this dinner. It was for John Ford, and there was a table there where you're supposed to give your ticket, and Carrie comes up to the lady and says, hello, I'm terribly sorry, I forgot my ticket. May I get in, please? And she says, name? He says, Cary Grant. And she looks up and she says, you don't look like Cary Grant. He says, I know, nobody does.
Cary Grant was completely manufactured. And this is the story about the man who invented him, Archie Leech. Behind the matinee idol looks lies the story of 4 failed marriages, experimentation with drugs, and gossip of bisexuality.
For more than 58 years, I have cautiously peered from behind the facade of a man known as Cary Grant. My family name is Leech, to which of my christening was added Archibald Alexander. I was born in the provincial city of Bristol, England, and have avidly frequented the brightest capitals of the world ever since. I had no sisters, was separated from my mother when I was 9, and stammeringly shy in the presence of girls. Yet have married 3 times and found myself making love in front of millions of people to such fascinating women as Ingrid Bergman, Doris Day, Mae West, Irene Dunn, Deborah Kerr, Eva Marie Saint, Sophia Elliot.
Elsie was a strict mother, and she was from that part of the working class that believed in good manners, great deal of story and good appearance. And so Archie was brought up to be a good boy. He was taught to doff his cap whenever he was out and met anyone. He was taught proper table manners. And so she believed very much in giving him the right kind of instruction to really not let anyone down.
We never talked about his father. He didn't really know his father, although he had a picture of him. He was terribly handsome, as one can imagine he would be. He with a mustache and terribly dashing. But he didn't really know him. I didn't know much about him. Oh, and if he did, he didn't let on that he did.
His upbringing in a working-class area of Bristol was unexceptional, until the abrupt disappearance of his mother, an event that would haunt him for the rest of his life.
He came home from school one day and saw that she just wasn't there. She just disappeared. No one would ever tell him what had happened. It seemed he was just told that she had gone. And he was left to think either that she'd died or that she'd abandoned the family.
It remains unclear why Archie's father, Elias, had Elsie committed to Bristol Asylum. She may have been suffering from depression or schizophrenia. She may simply have cramped his style. The effect on Archie was devastating.
The loss of his mother, the disappearance of his mother, very much made him feel that he was at fault. He later said that he felt that it must have been something to do with him that had led to the breakup of the family or the disappearance of his mother.
There was a void in my life, a sadness of spirit that affected each daily activity. But there was no further explanation of my mother's absence, and I gradually got accustomed to the fact that she was not home each time I came home, nor it transpired that she was ever expected to come home.
In the short term, he had to grow up very quickly. Elias wasn't really there very much. He was either at work or he was relaxing elsewhere. He had a mistress. And Archie really was a latchkey child. He just had to go to school, look after himself, and find forms of entertainment to occupy his leisure time.
Self-reliant at 14, Archie left school with his eyes on a stage career. He joined a troupe of knockabout comedians led by Bob Pender, touring the English provinces and adopting a Cockney accent for the London music halls. In the summer of 1920, he was one of 8 Pender boys chosen to perform on Broadway. The show in New York ran for over 450 performances, and when the troupe returned to England, Archie Leech stayed on. For 5 years, he lived hand-to-mouth, taking any job that came his way, including placard walker and society escort.
It's one of the great transformations, how this really poor kid from the English West Country, Bristol area, transforms himself into Cary Grant, the Mr. Cosmopolitan, Mr. Man of the World, and does it really in the space of about 10 or a dozen years.
While in New York, he made his screen debut in a short called Singapore Sue. It was a performance by Leech that Cary Grant grew to hate.
You and me, we chop suey through the park. We chow mein. Yes, Hong Kong, ping pong. What do you say?
The lure of the movies drew Leech to Los Angeles and Paramount Studios, where a successful screen test led to an offer of a 5-year contract, on condition that the young actor change his name. Carrie was chosen from a role he had played in a Broadway musical, Grant from a list of studio-approved surnames. The handsome English actor was cast opposite Paramount's top female stars. They were often colorless roles, but Grant was learning fast at the feet of Mae West and Marlene Dietrich, whose Blonde Venus was directed by Joseph von Sternberg.
I asked him about whether or not Joseph von Sternberg, who was nothing if not brilliant at the way things looked. Look at what he did with Dietrich, for example. And he also had a great eye, Joe, for the look of things. And I asked Carrie, I said, did Joe direct you at all? He said, well, not really. I said, what did he say anything? Yeah, he took one look at me and he said, your hair is parted on the wrong side. So I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I parted it on my other side and kept it that way the rest of my career.
You're just too marvelous.
Archie Leech was quick to learn what was required by the studio. The new name allowed him to create not only the perfect Hollywood leading man, but the opportunity to start afresh. Grant turned his back on his former life to become the person of his dreams.
He was drawing influences from all over the place. He took a bit from Noel Coward, a bit from Fred Astaire, a bit from Cole Porter, and he was developing his own sensitivity, his own approach, his own style.
It was in his first film with Katharine Hepburn on a studio loan-out to RKO But the Cary Grant persona that audiences grew to love first appeared fully formed on screen.
Why take hold of that oily black hair of his and...
Anything else you can think of? Here I am, now what? Oh, yeah.
Now, Sylvia Scarlett, I think we just somewhere went wrong on the script because the picture starts brilliantly and Cary Grant was wonderful.
He was playing a working class Englishman, and so he could really draw for the first time in his career to that point upon his own experiences and do it with confidence. And people on the set said that he really came into his own at that point in time. Everyone else suffered through that movie's reception. It was a great disaster, but Cary Grant came out of it more popular and more respected than before.
Let you and me muck along together, eh? And let the rest of the world go to pot. What do you say?
All right, then.
That's it. Here.
Cary Grant's characters on the screen presented an easiness around women. They were cool under pressure and attracted lovers like magnets. Off-screen, things were very different. His first wife, Virginia Cherrill, claimed he was too possessive. They divorced after only a year, and Grant moved to a beach house with fellow Paramount actor Randolph Scott, with whom he appeared in the film My Favorite Wife.
The house is on the beach, had its own pool, and if you have to think back, you had the two best-looking men in Hollywood sharing a room together on the beach. Having talked to some of the women that have been there, they definitely left everybody else to shame. My dad and Cary Grant were working for the same studio. Studios back in the 1930s loved promotional photographs and things like that. They sent a photographer to the beach house, and of course it was warm, sunny, and so they had them in their bathing suits, very close together in this sort of dreamy sort of look on their face. And I guess, you know, my opinion would be, with the way the two of them looked, you'd call them pretty. I mean, they were handsome men, but they were definitely pretty looking. Well, looking back from 65 years in the future from those shots, they look a little gay.
The Bachelor image that the studios were trying to promote backfired when one columnist suggested that they were carrying this buddy business a bit too far.
It's easier now to see that Grant always had a fascinating androgynous quality. He appealed to men and women. The rumor is that he was bisexual. And in Hollywood, in the end, they print the rumor. So I think that as time passes, it will be accepted that he was bisexual.
Sticking matches?
Oh, yes.
Blue ought to go with blue, huh?
Very becoming.
It's for a friend of mine. He's waiting downstairs.
Oh, I see. What's with you?
The rumors pursued Grant throughout his life, later helped by the star's own revelation that he had a taste for sporting women's underwear.
Cary told me that he wore women's panties because when he traveled, he took 2 pair of women's panties with him, and he'd rinse out 1 pair at night and wear the other pair, and he kept this routine, and that meant he only had to take 2 pair of panties, whereas if he'd worn men's pants, men's underwear, you know, washing them would be kind of a problem. And also, they didn't show a line of any kind underneath your trousers. It sounded like absolute nonsense to me, but that's what he said.
I asked Howard Hawks about that one time. I said, is Cary, is that true that he's gay? He said, oh, God, no. He says, oh, every time I saw him, he had a younger woman on his arm. No, not at all. And then there was this rather famous incident with, famous, it was just sort of a stupid incident where Chevy Chase made some kind of remark on television about Cary being gay. And Cary sued him. And I talked to him. I said, what's going on with this? He said, well, I'm not going to let him get away with it. I don't care if I was, but I'm not. Of course, he's only doing me a favor, you know. I said, what do you mean? Well, he's just doing me a favor. I said, why do you say that? Well, just imagine, you know, this has been going on my whole life. He said, you know, guy sitting in a movie theater with his girl, he sees me on a screen, and he says, you know, he's gay. Well, you know, he's just done me a favor. I said, how do you say that? He said, well, if I come to that town, which girl do you think is going to be the first one in my hotel to see if it's true or not? So he's just doing me a favor.
You get something, old man? How would you like to come along with me? Just for the ride, huh?
As a side note, my dad went every year to the Mayo Clinic, and there are telltale signs if someone's been engaging in that kind of sexual activity. And because his doctor is still alive, I can pretty much tell you that that evidence was never there. So, like I said, it didn't make me angry, it just made me feel bad.
His success in Sylvia Scarlett for RKO led Grant to quit Paramount and go freelance. That brave move made him a star.
It was generally understood that Leo McCarrie directed him rather carefully, and that Cary Grant was in fact doing a kind of aspect of Leo McCarrie, who was also tall, dark, good-looking, and very urbane and rather witty. But all that business that Cary does in the picture, you know, is, oh yeah, oh really, was very McCarrie.
Well, that's funny. I only bought the hat an hour ago, and look at it.
Soon after that, he was on a run of movies. From the late 30s through to the early 40s, which really were the great classic Cary Grant movies.
I think Cary Grant was beginning to find what was essentially him in bringing up Baby. But he's able to use it so well that he can go from very humorous films to very dramatic situations. And in a sense, his core doesn't change. What he does, of course, is simply emphasize some aspects of that core and, as it were, turn down the volume on other aspects.
Susan!
Yes, David.
Oh, you're all right.
Yes, I'm all right.
You lied to me.
No, well, I did just
Telling me a
little bit,
ridiculous
but-
story
No,
about a
it wasn't
leopard.
a ridiculous story. I have a leopard.
Well, where is the
right
leopard?
in there.
I don't believe you, Susan.
But you have to believe me.
I've
It's
been
the
a victim
absolute
of your
truth.
unbridled imagination once more. All the way you're talking about.
Just as Cary Grant's career was taking off, he heard the extraordinary news that his mother had been released from Bristol Asylum. The death of her husband meant Elsie Leech was free to leave after 20 years.
It was an extraordinary experience that for Elsie, she was suddenly seeing this 6'2", tall, dark and handsome Hollywood movie star called Cary Grant, whom she'd last seen as a 9-year-old called Archie Leech. And he didn't sound really the same, he didn't look the same, and it was very disorientating, obviously, for her.
Grant wanted Elsie to come and live with him in Hollywood. But having been sheltered in an institution for so many years, she was terrified of making a journey halfway around the world. So Grant had to travel to Bristol, and on his first of many trips home, he bought his mother a house.
They couldn't really get to know each other properly, face to face, and so
There is a film called None But the Lonely Heart, which he really produced himself, which is not well known. But it's about a poor kid and his mother. Ethel Barrymore plays the mother. And you feel with that film that Grant is saying something about that relationship. And I don't know whether childhood disturbed him. I think his relationship with the mother had been unresolved, and that may be what it was about.
What'd you come back home for, son? Miss me?
Can't say I did, Ma. You know me, Ducky. Tramp of the universe.
You know, his mother lived very long. I mean, Carrie had retired from film and she was still alive. I think she was well into her 90s when she died, and Carrie was 70-something by the time. And he was very conflicted with and by her, because while she was infirm, it was his mom, and he went to visit her as often as he could in Bristol.
By the end of the 1930s, the Cary Grant persona was perfected. It was a creation that worked with the public, though the more skillful directors saw even greater potential. Alfred Hitchcock twisted the screen image by casting Grant in roles that played against his persona, particularly in the films Notorious and Suspicion.
What did you think I was trying to do? Kill you?
He was the first big star to do a picture with Alfred Hitchcock. He kind of legitimized Hitchcock. On the other hand, Hitchcock said to me, he says, you know, one doesn't direct Cary Grant. One just puts him in front of a camera.
Joan Fontaine is Grant's neurotic wife in Suspicion. She believes he is plotting to kill her, but her fears are ultimately, if somewhat unconvincingly, shown to be groundless.
In the original script, he was the murderer. And the studio didn't want Cary Grant as a murderer, and they changed the ending. And I remember him telling me that. And when I watched the film again, you can understand that because it's so obvious he's the killer. And at the end, suddenly he's a nice guy, and it would have been better if he was the murderer, actually. What they originally planned to do was, when he brings Joan Fontaine the milk, which is poison, she gives him an envelope, and then she drinks the milk, and he opens it up, and she says, I know you're the murderer. That's more Hitchcock, really.
Good night, Lena.
The first two films he did with Hitchcock, Notorious and Suspicion. Now, these are brilliant performances because for a very long period of time, I guess the films are 90 minutes or something like this, he treads this very fine line when he could be innocent after all, or he could be the ultimate rat. And to play that for as long as he does is an extraordinarily skillful thing to do.
Oh, I think I'll take the shortcut.
I do think that Grant was one of those people that basically got it quickly. He was not of the generation of the actor studio and the method who needed to know motivation.
Come on, try, sit up. Sit up. I'm going to get you out of here.
I thought you had gone.
No, I had to see you once speak my piece. I was getting out because I love you. I couldn't bear seeing you and him together.
In 1942, he married Woolworth heiress Barbara Hutton. The gossip columnists had a field day, nicknaming the couple Cash and Carrie. They bought a home a few doors along from the Bachelor Boys beach house Grant had just left.
This is the dining room that Barbara Hutton and Cary Grant used. During World War II, they couldn't go to Maxime's restaurant in Paris, which was, I guess, her favorite, and she tried to recreate it here by putting purple carpet on the floor, purple velvet banquettes around the sides of the room, and then she had the entire room done in this mirrored glass, which we have kept on this wall as an homage à Barbara.
Her friends were really from the kind of class that Archie Leech had only really known in terms of their distance and their snobbery back home in England. And that really did harm their relationship and certainly unhinged the marriage.
Well, she was a tragic figure. She had a miserable childhood, miserable. And, you know, it took its toll on her. Her father was an alcoholic. Her mother died when she was 8, and she and her father didn't get along very well. She was a very neurotic person, very difficult, and she had a lot of problems. And I think it just She was the one who split it. I think she was the one who split off. I think he was crazy about her.
Cary Grant and Barbara Hutton couldn't have children, and Cary Grant very much, even at that stage, wanted children. And that was another source of tension in the marriage.
The marriage lasted for 3 years and the divorce was an amicable one. Hutton died an alcoholic in 1978, believing that the years spent with Grant were the happiest of her troubled life, and her fondest memory, the time they spent together at the beach house in Santa Monica. Wife number 3 was waiting on the set of the next picture.
Oh, sorry. After you.
Thank you. How many have you?
Beg your pardon?
These. How many have you?
Why, none, fortunately.
Fortunately.
I'm not married.
The desire to be a family man meant Grant brought a new determination to his marriage to Betsy Drake 6 months later. He was wearying of his screen creation and tried to turn his back on his public persona. Encouraged by Betsy, he embraced a series of alternative lifestyles and therapies, health foods, yoga, hypnosis, and even psychedelic drugs.
Cary was very much in search of himself and very, very much seeking to gain control of his life.
Normal people react to LSD by seeing strange patterns of wildly moving colors.
Some people had terrible trips which just left them absolutely drained and in some cases altered. For Cary, it was a blast. He really loved it. He loved what it did. He loved the effect of it. He loved the trips they sent him on. He loved the whole thing.
And at other times, the subject may recall with terrifying detail incidents that are long, long forgotten.
I took LSD with the hope it would make me feel better about myself. I wanted to rid myself of all hypocrisies. I wanted to work through the events of my childhood, my relationship with my parents, and my former wives.
It worked incredibly well for him. It really did. I mean, he felt so strongly about it that he really became a recruiter, which is how he got all the rest of us to go into it as well. He said that it really taught him to master the things in his life that bothered him, one of which, of course, was smoking.
He was able to accommodate all the conflicting sexual drives he had, which I think almost everyone has, and really it allowed him to see himself naked, as it were.
I think there was a part of him that still thought, I'm Archibald Leech and I'm just pretending to be Cary Grant. I think the thing that he discovered was that he was not pretending. He actually had become Cary Grant.
Cary Grant, and this year's Academy Award.
It was Hitchcock who lured Grant out of his retirement. The recently released Rear Window had impressed him, and the temptations of To Catch a Thief included the script, the location in the south of France, and particularly the co-star.
Now, here comes some of the clever part. You're just not convincing, John. You're like an American character in an English movie. You just don't talk the way an American tourist ought to talk.
Don't you know that all the guidebooks say don't behave like a tourist?
Well, it's just that you never mention business or baseball or television or wage freezes or Senate probes.
You know, all the things I left America to forget.
You're just not American enough to carry it off.
Now aged 55, Grant was becoming increasingly self-conscious about his age. He feared his image was going out of style and worried that the clarity of new film processing techniques would expose his crow's feet and graying hair. So he chose roles that defied his years.
So what else do you know?
You've got taste in clothes, taste in food.
I'm tasting women. I like your flavor.
He also claimed to dislike being cast with women 30 years younger.
Carrie turned 60 when he made this film, but he was determined not to chase Audrey, who was in her early 30s, and he thought it was unseemly for a man his age. Now, of course, he was exquisite looking. I mean, he was really just a phenomenal looking human being.
Look, I know it's asking you to stretch your imagination, but don't you think you could pretend just for a moment that I'm a woman?
Now listen, I could already be arrested for transporting a minor above the first floor. Here you are.
Where?
On the street where you live.
How about once more around the park?
How about getting out of here? Come on, child, out.
Won't you come in for a minute?
No, I won't.
I don't bite, you know. Unless it's called for.
How would you like a spanking?
How'd you like a punch in the nose? Stop treating me like a child.
Well, then stop behaving like one. Now, if you want to tell me what's troubling you, fine. If not, I'm tired, it's late, and I want to go home to bed. Oh?
Do you know what's wrong with you?
No, what?
Nothing.
By the end of the 50s, Grant was #1 in the box office poll of the most popular male stars. While his stardom was secure, his third marriage to Betsy Drake was on the rocks. The LSD treatment couldn't prevent the collapse of this, his third marriage, after his affair with Sophia Elliot during the making of The Pride and the Passion in Spain.
We were talking about life and love and kids and the whole thing. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I've just now decided that I probably would be quite a good father. And I said, well, that's a hell of a time to decide this. You've just divorced Betsy. You know, I found it so ludicrous that he would say this when he'd just gotten divorced.
Sheila Allen was Cary Grant's housekeeper at his Beverly Hills home when he spotted wife #4, Diane Cannon.
Diane was just something to have a baby by, I swear to God. That was the only reason. He saw her in a cowboy film, and he said she looked strong and healthy. I mean, that's not the way to choose a wife, is it? He made the biggest mistake of his life marrying her, but he got a beautiful daughter, so he was thankful, I suppose. I felt sorry for both of them. They were so mixed up, both of them. It was pitiful, really pitiful.
First of all, there was this enormous age thing, and as Carrie got older, it was harder. She convinced Carrie to have the daughter, and he was absolutely Jennifer, and absolutely delighted. And that child was in many ways the center of this relationship.
After the birth of their daughter, the relationship fell apart.
There was a great distance between them, obviously, in terms of age, and also a great distance between them in terms of their interests, their tastes, their values, and what they wanted to do with their lives. Diane Cannon was an up-and-coming performer who wanted to make more movies. Cary Grant was someone who had just about come to the end, as far as he was concerned, of his career, and wanted to turn his back on Hollywood.
They were going to do like where all these producers were going to be, and she said, I have to get a new dress. I said, I think you better. She came back with these 2 black dresses. She said, will these be all right? What do you think? I said, no, I'm not going to say anything. I said, that he won't like those. So she said, well, I'm going to see. And he comes marching in like he usually does, had a drink, and she said, Gary, these dresses. And he looked at them and he said, you better take those back. See, he was more on the ladylike style. She was more on the frivolous young girl style.
All of his other relationships had ended in a way that was relatively pleasant and genteel almost. They stayed on good terms. But the breakup between Diane Cannon and Cary Grant was explosive. The divorce case in particular was something that Cary Grant had never really experienced before. All kinds of allegations about him and his treatment of Diane Cannon were made public, much to his horror. This very private man was forced to read in the papers revelations about his life and his personality and his dealings with other people day after day in the daily newspapers.
Mr. Grant said, Mrs. Allen, sit down a minute, sit down. I said, what do you want, Mr. Grant? He said, well, I want to know why I can't make a good husband. I said, when you're married, you want to be single. And I said, when you're single, you want to be married. I said, to be truthful, you really don't know what you want. He sort of hunched his shoulders and said, well, I tried. I said, no, you don't try. I said, the wife comes first. You see, he was a famous film star, and anybody above him wasn't acceptable.
Following the divorce from Cannon, Grant retired from the screen, only to announce a surprising new career move as a director of cosmetics company Fabergé.
He became obsessed with finding out where Diane Cannon was going and where the child would be and when he could next get to see her. He used the Fabergé jet to fly all over the country, all over the world, if he thought there was the hope of an hour or two with his daughter.
They weren't really making his kind of film anymore, and the material was not there. A whole new generation was coming along, and I think he was intelligent enough to step aside and to resist blandishments to return.
I think it's a great tragedy that he stopped making films. I understand why he did, but I think it's a great tragedy because it was a great loss, and I think he would never have gone out of style.
Despite a 75-year film career, Grant never won an Oscar. In 1970, the Academy moved to make amends, as it does to those illustrious names it has shamefully neglected, by awarding him a special Oscar for a lifetime's achievement.
Carrie alone, it seems to me, is the one star of that period whose style and look remains timeless. And as a result, his films, with very few exceptions, are every bit as delightful and modern today as they were when they were first made.